Alright, so what I'm going to do in today's video is that I've removed every player from the NHL besides every team's best player, meaning that every team only has one good player and the rest absolutely suck. There's just a bunch of one-man shows going on in the NHL nowadays, and we are going to simulate and see who has the best player from their team in the entire NHL. So taking a look at the NHL, there's obviously going to be favorites like Edmonton. They have Connor McDavid, who is a 97 overall. We can take a look at Colorado. They have Nathan MacKinnon, who is a 95 overall. Obviously, the Pittsburgh Penguins kept Sidney Crosby and dumped everybody else. Toronto will keep Matthews at a 94. The Capitals are going to keep Alex Ovechkin, obviously. Now, there was some interesting ones like the New York Islanders. They are actually going to keep their goaltender, Ilya Sorokin. He is a 91 overall, but for the most part, everybody's best player was a player and not a goaltender. So we are going to simulate along and see who has the best player on their team in the entire NHL. If you guys enjoy videos like this, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I post pretty much every second day. Alright, now let's get into the video. At the end of year number 1, the Red Wings are going to end up finishing first in the entire NHL, going 53, 20, and 9, followed by the Anaheim Ducks, the Montreal Canadiens, the Minnesota Wild. Toronto was up there. Arizona was actually very good with 49 wins. Looking at the bottom of the NHL, we have the Winnipeg Jets, the New Jersey Devils, and the New York Islanders. Two of these three teams, actually their best player was a goaltender, so that might do it. Considering that goalies do need a team in front of them to be actually good, because if you put an absolute garbage team in front of a goaltender, they're not going to be very good. Somehow Erik Karlsson is actually going to have the most points out of any player in the entire NHL as a defenseman. He would have 119, followed by Jason Robertson's 117, Nikita Kucherov 112, Connor McDavid had 111, Ovi had 108, Johnny Hockey 107, Matthews 106, Crosby 106, and Tage Thompson 103. For goals, Alex Ovechkin is going to lead everybody with 72, followed by McDavid 65, Kucherov 64, Eichel 62, Jason Robertson had 61, McKinnon 58, Matthews 57, Crosby 57, and Pasta 56. I mean, for defensemen, it was not even close. It was Karlsson and then everybody else. Brent Seabrook is actually going to come in second place with 96 points. Drew Doughty had 90, Broberg 88, Dunn 85, Hutton 72, 82. See, the problem here is a lot of teams, their best player are not a defenseman, so a lot of these guys are just random players, but they are putting up career years like Brent Seabrook. 9 goals, 87 assists for 96 points in 82 games. For goalies, Peric is going to have the most wins at 43, followed by Dostals 42, DiPietro 41, Wall 39. For shutouts, Hellberg is going to have the most on Detroit. He had 9 shutouts, DiPietro had 8, and Sandstrom had 8. And this is our year 1 playoff matchups, and believe it or not, we have the Coyotes versus the Red Wings in the Stanley Cup final of year number 1. Who is going to go on and win the Stanley Cup? Dylan Larkin and the Red Wings are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Clayton Keller and the Arizona Coyotes in 6 games in the Stanley Cup final, and they have won the Stanley Cup in year number 1. Dylan Larkin, the best player and basically the only player on the Red Wings. It was a back and forth series, but Dylan Larkin is going to close the show here, and here he is, Captain Dylan Larkin, coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the very first time in his career, first time lifting the Stanley Cup, and he is our year 1 Stanley Cup champion. The Red Wings and Dylan Larkin, basically just Dylan Larkin because the rest of the team suck. For the playoffs, Clayton Keller is actually going to have the most points at 31, followed by Dylan Larkin's 27. Sidney Crosby had 24, Nylander 21, O'Connor 19, Cassian. Zach Cassian had 7 goals and 19 points in 23 games. Erik Karlsson is going to take home the Ted Lindsay, the Art Ross, the Hart Trophy, the Norris Trophy, while Ovi, he's going to take home the Maurice Richard. Dylan Larkin is going to take home the Conn Smythe. Hellberg is going to win the Vezina, and Austin Matthews is somehow going to take home the Selke. At the end of year 2, the Vancouver Canucks are going to finish first in the entire NHL, going 58, 23, and 1, followed by the Anaheim Ducks, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Montreal Canadiens, Colorado, Florida, and Ottawa. Looking at the bottom of the NHL, we have the New York Rangers, the Calgary Flames, the Capitals, Winnipeg was down there. Austin Matthews is going to have the most goals at 77 and the most points at 133, followed by Pastas 123, McKinnon 121, McDavid 116, Kucherov 116, Jack Eichel had 115, Elias Pettersson 112, Crosby 106, and Drew Doughty 105. For goals, it was Matthews who had the most, obviously, followed by Jack Eichel who had 70, Pasta would have 70 as well, Kucherov 62, McDavid 62, McKinnon 59, Ovi 56, 57. Jason Robertson had 56, and Brady Tkachuk would have 54. For defensemen, Drew Doughty is going to have the most points at 105, followed by Carlson's 100. Hutton had 86, Dunn 83. Roman Josi had 78, Brent Seabrook 75. For goalies, Tommy Napier is going to have the most wins at 45, followed by Shell, who had 44, DiPietro 41, Lindbaum 40. Dostal was up there, Ben Bishop was up there as well. And this is our year 2 playoff matchups. And in the Stanley Cup final, we have the Arizona Coyotes versus the Philadelphia Flyers. Who is going to go on to win the Stanley Cup in year number 2? Clayton Keller and the Arizona Coyotes are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Sean Couturier and the Philadelphia Flyers in 4 games in the Stanley Cup final. It was a clean sweep. It was not even close. This is literally the only simulation you will see Arizona dominate like this, I swear to God, as they are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup. And here comes number 23. I think it was that Mackey guy coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the Arizona Coyotes. Hopefully he's going to pass it off to Clayton Keller, the best player and basically the only player on the Coyotes, because out of everybody, he by far deserves it the most. There he is, Clayton Keller lifting the Stanley Cup for the very first time in his career for the Arizona Coyotes. Somehow they are actually going to go on and win the Stanley Cup. Man, they swept Philly in the Stanley Cup final. That is insane. For the entire playoff, Sean Couturier is going to have the most goals at 10 and the most points at 28, followed by, I don't even know who the hell this guy is. I cannot pronounce that last name, but he had 25. Shea Weber would have 20, Mackey 19, Ryan Kessler would have 18, Tage Thompson would have 17, Long 17, McDavid was up there. Austin Matthews is going to take home the Ted Lindsay, the Maurice Richard, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy. Erik Karlsson is yet again going to take home the Norris. Shea Weber is actually going to take home the Conn Smythe for the Arizona Coyotes. Ilya Sorokin is going to win the Vezina, and Sidney Crosby is going to take home the Selke. At the end of year number 3, the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to finish first in the NHL, going 53, 20, and 9, followed by the Montreal Canadiens, the Ottawa Senators, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Vancouver Canucks. At the bottom of the NHL, we have the Winnipeg Jets, the Red Wings, who finished second last in the entire NHL, the LA Kings, the New York Rangers, and the Edmonton Oilers. Oh my God. Matthews would yet again have the most points in the entire NHL, this time with 132, followed by Pasternak's 125, Kaprizov 115, Roman Josi had 110, Erik Karlsson had 110, Troy Terry had 107, Sidney Crosby 106, Ovi 104. For goals, Pasta is going to have the most at 79, followed by Matthews 77, Ovi 71, Kucherov 66, Nathan MacKinnon had 58, Jack Eichel 51, McDavid 51, Crosby 50, and Jason Robertson 49. For defensemen, Roman Josi is going to have the most goals at 20 and the most points at 110, followed by Erik Karlsson. Actually, they were both tied with 110. Drew Doughty would have 96, Vince Dunn 95, Seth Jones 80, Hutton 80. For goalies, Cormier is going to have 46, which led all goaltenders in wins, followed by Perix 44, Salgard 43, Bishop 39, Henrik 39, Napier 38. And in the Stanley Cup final, we have the Montreal Canadiens versus the Minnesota Wild, who is going to go on to take home the Stanley Cup in year number 3. And Nick Suzuki and the Montreal Canadiens are going to go on to beat Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild in 6 games in the Stanley Cup finals. And finally, a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup for the first time in over like 30 years, and yet again, it is the Montreal Canadiens. They were the last Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup, and now they bring it back to Canada, baby. Mikey DiPietro is actually going to take home the Conn Smythe for the Montreal Canadiens, and here comes Captain Nick Suzuki coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the very first time in his career as a Montreal Canadian, as the Montreal Nick Suzukis have gone on to win the Stanley Cup in year number 3. For the playoffs, Kirill Kaprizov is going to have the most goals at 17 and the most points at 36, followed by Dewar, who had 27, Crosby 23, Troy Terry 20. Austin Matthews is going to take home the Ted Lindsay, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy, while Pasta, he's going to take home the Maurice Richard. Erik Karlsson is going to take home the Norris yet again. Sogard is going to win the Vezina, and Austin Matthews is going to take home the Selke. At the end of year number 4, the Montreal Canadiens are going to finish first in the NHL, winning 59 games, 15 losses, and and 8 overtime losses, followed by the Vancouver Canucks who won 56, Anaheim 55, Buffalo 49, Nashville and Colorado also won 52. At the bottom of the NHL, yet again, the Winnipeg Jets. They have just been absolutely terrible. I'm sorry, Connor Hellebuyck, you have had a rough time, buddy, in the simulation. Followed by the Devils, the Blues, and the Red Wings. Wow, Detroit has absolutely fallen off. Looking at the NHL, oh my god, Connor McDavid is going to lead the NHL in goals with 91 goals. He would also have 132 points, obviously leading the entire NHL. Followed by Matthews, who had 130, Pettersson 119, Kucherov 115, Pasta 110, Troy Terry had 107, Eichel 104, and Kaprizov, oh my god, Devin Shore is going to have 24 goals and 103 points. That is absolutely insane. For goals other than McDavid, it was Matthews, then Kucherov, Ovechkin, Pasternak, Kaprizov, McKinnon, and Jason Robertson. For defensemen, Erik Karlsson is yet again going to have the most points, this time with 99, followed by Seabrooks 94, Roman Josi 92, Drew Doughty had 79, Seth Jones 77. For goalies, Dostal is going to have the most wins at 47, followed by DiPietro's 46, Cormier 45, Napier had 45, Shear had 43. These names are getting harder and harder, I swear to god, every video. And in the Stanley Cup final, we have two Canadian teams, the Vancouver Canucks versus the Montreal Canadiens. Who is going to go home with the Stanley Cup in year number 4? And Nick Suzuki and the Montreal Canadiens are going to go on and beat Elias Pettersson and the Vancouver Canucks in 6 games in the Stanley Cup final. The Montreal Nick Suzukis have won their second Stanley Cup of the simulation, and they are yet again Stanley Cup champions. Nick Suzuki is going to take home the Conn Smythe for the Montreal Canadiens, and yet again, here's Nick Suzuki coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the second time of the simulation, as yet again, the Montreal Nick Suzukis are Stanley Cup champions. For the playoffs, Nick Suzuki is going to have the most points with 33, followed by Elias Pettersson, 26, Kaprizov, 25, Lonin had 24, Faber, 19, McDonough, 18, Tkachuk, 18, Troy Terry, 18. For goals, Kaprizov had the most at 14, followed by McDonough's 12, Lonin or Yonin, I have no idea how to say this guy's name, but he would have 12 goals in the playoffs, followed by Nick Suzuki's 10, and Auston Matthews would also have 10. Auston Matthews is going to take home the Ted Lindsay and the Hart Trophy, while Connor McDavid is going to take home the Art Ross and the Maurice Richard. Brent Seabrook is actually going to win the Norris. The Lady Bing Napidi. Nick Suzuki would take home the Conn Smythe. Mikey DiPietro is going to win the Vezina. And Auston Matthews is going to take home the Selke. At the end of year number 5, the Vancouver Canucks are going to win 60 games, which led the entire NHL, followed by the Montreal Canadiens, who won 53, Arizona 53, Ottawa 49, Minnesota 51, Toronto 49. Yet again, the Winnipeg Jets are at the bottom of the NHL, followed by the New Jersey Devils, the New York Rangers, and the St. Louis Blues. Honestly, I feel so bad for Winnipeg. Like, they have done absolutely nothing this simulation. They finished dead last basically every single season. Yet again, Auston Matthews is going to lead the NHL in goals with 72 and points with 125, followed by Sidney Crosby, who had 117, Connor McDavid 116, Jason Robertson 113, Kaprizov 111, Elias Pettersson 109, Nathan McKinnon 105, Pasta 105, and Clayton Keller 101. For goals other than Matthews, it was Ovi, who had 68, McKinnon 65, Pasta 65, McDavid 58, Kucherov 57, Jason Robertson at 55, Crosby 54, and Kaprizov 51. For defensemen, Drew Doughty is going to have the most goals at 24 and the most points at 97, followed by Roman Josi, who had 87, Erik Karlsson 81, Seabrook 76, Hutton 74. For goalies, Napier is going to have the most wins at 51. I cannot pronounce this guy's name, but Ivan would have 46, Perrick 41, DiPietro 40, Cormier 40. And in the Stanley Cup final, we have Anaheim versus Toronto, who is going to go on and win the Stanley Cup in year number 5. And Auston Matthews and the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Troy Terry and the Anaheim Ducks in 6 games in the Stanley Cup final. Finally, Toronto captures that Stanley Cup for the first time in over like 50 years, and Auston Matthews gets the first Stanley Cup ring of his career. Austin Matthews is going to take home the Conn Smythe for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And here comes the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs, number 25. Who the hell is this? I have no idea, but he's coming to lift the Stanley Cup before Austin Matthews. But I'm sure as hell he's going to pass it off to him. Who is this guy? I don't even know who the hell that last name is. I didn't even see it. And there he is, Austin Matthews, lifting the Stanley Cup for the very first time in his career. He is no longer a playoff choker as he captures his first ring of his career with the Toronto Maple Leafs as the best and only player. For the playoffs, Austin Matthews is going to have the most points at 32, followed by Troy Terry, who had 30. Hollowell had 27. Wayne Simmons would have 10 goals and 24 points. Nathan MacKinnon had 22. Couturier 20. Nestorenko 19. For goals, Troy Terry had the most at 12, followed by McDavid's 11, Matthews 11, McKinnon 10, Wayne Simmons 10. Matthews is yet again going to take home the Ted Lindsay, the Maurice Richard, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy. Drew Doughty is going to win the Norris. David Pasternak is going to win the Lady Byng. Cormier is going to take home the Vezina, and Sidney Crosby is going to take home the Selke. And that is going to do it for this video, boys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this, as we are on the grind until NHL 24 comes out, which is probably around October 10. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Until next time, don't be silly. Wrap your willy.